Hello, welcome back to the RazorwireReviews Podcast, the triple threat of wrestling, movies, and life. And today is the 14th of October 2014. It is currently 9:47 in the evening, night time. And I'll leave that little flub in. And yeah, this one's going to be just a general podcast. I was going to do the third part of my WrestleMania story, but I'm going to save that for another time. I don't have the time to go into detail again like I have the past 2 weeks with those epic podcasts where I talked about my big WrestleMania 30 story. And really, you know, the third part of the story is really just tying up loose ends, what we did the night after WrestleMania, leaving the building, our last day in New Orleans, and the Monday Night Raw, which was great, but it wasn't quite as special as WrestleMania, obviously. So I'm going to do that in a couple of weeks, I think. But for now, just some general stuff. Like always, just a bit of a mishmash of topics and subjects. I currently have a sock wrapped around my microphone because I've been having some problems with my recordings with the P sounds. And if I say, pretty or, pleasing, the main offender, I think, on the last podcast was CM Punk. The P really... the microphone doesn't like it. That's why we have a pop shield, which is one of those things that you attach to your microphone. It has it's like a kind of a gauze. And I was trying to look into picking one up, but even the cheapest ones on Amazon, you'd be paying the same price in shipping, and so I can't get one just yet. Hopefully, when I visit home tomorrow, it won't be tomorrow, but at some point over the next week, I'm going to see if I can find a pop shield in Cardiff and maybe pick one up, because I'll be taking my microphone with me to record some stuff for future podcasts and future projects as well. Hopefully the sock works. I used this trick years ago with a microphone. Again, it's very lo-fi. It works to an extent. I mean, obviously it's not for people who are trying to get professional recordings, but I'm not trying to get professional recording. Hopefully this doesn't sound too muffled either. If it does, then I won't use this method again. But I did do a quick test, and it seemed to soften the P problem a little bit, so hopefully that'll make it a little bit more easier on the ears. Anyway, let's get right into what we usually start off with, some questions from you guys. Picking things up with last week, I left a question over from Ryan Chataway, best cinema experience. Now again, I'm going to leave this until the main topic of the podcast because I've got a lot to say about that, so keeping that in mind, you can expect that coming up. My best cinema experience I'll be talking about quite a few of them. So I'll answer Ryan's question at the main part of this podcast. But moving on, I sent out another request today on Facebook. Got a few questions back from you guys. So the first one's from Nick Harvey. He says, what's your opinion on WWE trying to book Rock versus Triple H at WrestleMania 31? I don't think it should happen, as we've seen it all before. If there's one person The Rock should put over, it's that Russian monster Rusev, as that would elevate his career, saying he'd beaten the Great One. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't really think it should happen. I mean, at this point, it's definitely a big money match. It's definitely like a big marquee, The Rock versus Triple H. Triple H, he was a big star in the Attitude Era, but the thing for me with Triple H, I think he's a great worker, a very good wrestler. He's had a great career, but for me, he was never quite as big an attraction as The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Undertaker or Shawn Michaels, the people who he wrestled with throughout their prime and throughout his prime, but he was never quite on their level, in my opinion, in almost every aspect, and that's not taking anything away from him. But for me, The Rock and Triple H is just a match. I would like to see it. I'm sure it would be a really good match, and hey, I thought Triple H was fantastic at WrestleMania 30, so yeah, I would like to see the match. I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't switch the channel or anything. But I definitely think there's probably better people The Rock could face. But at this point, really, The Rock is only going to come back for a big match, and Triple H is a big opponent, so I can see why they're going for that. And it is a big money match. The Rock versus Rusev at WrestleMania, I don't think it would really work because The Rock, he's this big Hollywood star. He's not going to come in and lose a match to someone like Rusev. He lost to John Cena, but I think that was, John Cena he's a pretty mainstream star in his own right. To lose to someone like Rusev, again, nothing against Rusev, at this stage in the game, I think would be too risky a move. Maybe Rusev won't pan out and won't be a big star in the future. You can never tell. He's certainly showing a lot of promise, but it's a bit of a gamble. And then you have, of course, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. He's got such a big career in Hollywood. And I'm sure that the studios don't even like him doing this wrestling thing because it really jeopardizes future projects. He's injured himself the past 2 matches he had at WrestleMania 28 and 29. I believe it kind of delayed filming of Hercules. So again, I'm not sure if it'll even happen with him wrestling at WrestleMania. But for me, if it happened, okay, I can see there'll be history there. There'll be a lot that they can do. I really enjoyed their promo on SmackDown. That was a lot of fun, but I think that's probably should be best left at that. Just a fun promo, nothing more than that, really. But again, even if he wrestled Rusev, I just don't see it happening. I wouldn't mind that either, I suppose. Thanks for the question. Next up, Sean Harrison. He says, "What's one movie you really enjoyed up until the ending and changed your opinion?" Mine would be The Mist. I haven't seen The Mist, but it's a really good question. And again, sometimes with these questions, I think, that's a great question, but I don't really necessarily have a great answer to it. It takes a lot for me to really not like a film. But endings, for me, the ending is almost the most important thing. A film like The Dark Knight Rises, you can analyze it and say, this wasn't good or that wasn't good. But for me, the last 3 or 4 minutes of The Dark Knight Rises, pretty much the most perfect ending I've ever seen to a film. And it kind of, the way you leave the theater or the cinema, the impression you have is usually from how the ending went down, in my opinion. So the ending is so important, and again, it can be a game changer if you don't like the ending. A recent one I talked about on the podcast, Sinister, it wasn't the ending that I didn't like, it was the whole second half that I just thought cut a lot of the tension out of it for me personally, even though it was still a good film. But I'm trying to think of an example that really, okay, I guess we can go to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Big fan of the Harry Potter films. I love the first Deathly Hallows movie, love the second Deathly Hallows movie up until the last 10-15 minutes when what happened, and I just thought, oh my god, and I'm going to go into this because anyone who's listening to this and is one of those people, the few people who keep campaigning for me to continue my Harry Potter Odyssey series, there's good news. I'm doing all the research right now, and I will be filming the final parts to that series, parts 7 and 8, this week when I go home. So I'm going to have a lot to say about the Deathly Hallows Part 2 and the ending, and that's kind of probably the one I'd say that changed my opinion on the film. It didn't ruin it for me, but it definitely made me feel like, man, that was a great film, but it could have been a great film, you know what I mean? It just it seemed to just be a wasted opportunity, in my opinion. And I'll go way in depth on that in a couple of weeks whenever the video comes out of my epic review of the Deathly Hallows Part 2. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else, any other movie I've seen that, the ending changed my mind on the film. Not really. I mean, there's twist endings, and usually they're done quite well. I would say that, I forget which one it was now. It was either Saw 4 or Saw 5. One of the Saw sequels, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but it just kind of really shoehorned something in, just for the sake of, by this point it became such almost a trope of, the Saw films that end with the da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. Wow, and it's like, oh my god, it's a twist. Oh my god, like the end of the first Saw film is a classic. I think Saw, the movie Saw, is one of the best horror films of all time. I'll go out there and say it. I think it's such a fantastic film. There's such great tension to it, and the ending is fucking killer. And then they made the second one, and they kind of went a bit overboard with the gore. Which, again, the first Saw film, you don't see as much as in the other films. It just becomes that kind of torture porn stuff that I really don't like. And I watched Saw 2 and Saw 3, and then after Saw 3, I thought, well, that's it. Obviously, it's the end. But no, they did Saw 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And it was like, and I think it was the 4th or 5th one I saw in the cinema, and the ending was just like, oh, so they've done that. They keep searching for the next big, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum moment, and none of them have topped the original. So for me, I think it was either Saw 4 or 5, one of those two, probably even both, to be honest, that changed my opinion. But then, again, those two films, Saw 4 and 5, were not really great to begin with. They were okay, but again, I just didn't like the overuse of the gore in those films. But I guess they had to keep upping the ante. But there you go. I hope that answered your question. And if if I think of anything else, I'll post it on Facebook. And then finally, we have a question from Stuart Malholm, Sir Stuart. He says, if you could see any 2 movie franchises do a crossover, like Freddy vs. Jason, Batman vs. Superman, or the one with Rugrats and the Wild Thornberrys, great examples, what 2 would you pick, and what rough kind of plot would you give it? I've tried to think about this one beforehand, which is unusual for me. I usually just wing this, but for me, there's a few ways it could go, but I wouldn't like to just see like 2, like, you know, Back to the Future and Star Wars. It just wouldn't fit right with me, you know, even though I love those 2 franchises. It has to make some kind of sense and work. You know, Freddy vs. Jason, you get these 2 ridiculous horror franchises. You know, it works. You know, you can have fun with it. So what I think the main thing that stuck out in my head, I was trying to think of something to cross over Kill Bill with, because I'd love to see Uma Thurman as the bride again, and just, you know, having a badass battle with another, you know, badass woman. I was thinking of like Ripley from Aliens, but I couldn't think of a way to kind of logically, you know, put those 2 franchises together. Not that Kill Bill's a franchise, but you know what I mean, the 2 characters. And then I had this wild idea of crossing over Last Action Hero with Rambo and the Terminator, and what it would be Danny Madigan, the kid from Last Action Hero, is now all grown up, but he's still got his magic ticket, and you know, he hasn't used it in years, and you know, Nick the projectionist has long since passed away, and maybe it's like the anniversary of his death, and he feels a bit, you know, sentimental and kind of goes back to the old cinema or something like that, and has a print of like, say, the Terminator or something, and goes into the, you know, the Terminator, and then brings, you know, Arnie back out, and then kind of realizes, well, actually this is the Terminator. This isn't the Jack Slater I knew from the Jack Slater movie. And then he's like, oh god, I got to get him. You know, I've made a really bad decision here, so I got to get him back into the film. And then someone ends up running a print of Rambo 6 or something by accident, and then they go into that, and then and then you just have Rambo just kill Danny Madigan straight away, and then just have like the Arnie Stallone face-off, Rambo versus the Terminator, and then they just have like an hour-long kind of hunt through the woods and stuff. Just, I don't know, just so ridiculous. But I have one. This is my main one though. That I think could actually possibly work on some level. I was almost thinking of doing it with the Gremlins, but scratch that. So here's the one I've settled on. This is my $1 million answer. Beetlejuice meets Chucky, right? I've been watching the Child's Play series. I've been enjoying the films very much, and I would love to see that. And here's how you do it. You'd have was it Lydia, Winona Ryder's character in Beetlejuice? You know, she's, you know, in her 40s now, however old she is. She has kids of her own. Say she's divorced and she has a couple of children, and she's still living in the house that, you know, is inhabited by the ghosts of Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis. I don't know how you do that, because Alec Baldwin looks so completely different now than he did in Beetlejuice. It's almost like a completely different person. But oh, you could do it, and you could just make some gag about ghosts aging. I don't know. Or you could not even have them in a film, I guess, and it might get too crowded. But, you know, say Lydia's there. She got these 2 kids. She's divorced, and she meets this guy who's just moved into town, and it would be Andy, the guy, the little boy from Child's Play, and they get together, they hook up, and he moves in with her, and they have a very happy honeymoon period, and then suddenly Chucky arrives on the scene to you know, cause some more havoc in Andy's life, just for the pure fun of it. And then of course, you know, Beetlejuice. You could bring him back, Michael Keaton, and just have, you know, not even use them that much in the same way as Beetlejuice was made. You know, I think Michael Keaton's in about 17 minutes of the film, but his presence is felt throughout. You could use him and not have him in it very much, and then with Chucky, go back to like Child's Play, where, you know, for all intents and purposes, for a large part of the film, it's just a doll, and, you know, maybe Lydia's like, you know, saying to Andy, like, you know, what are you talking about, a talking doll? Even though that would be ridiculous, because she's, you know, living with ghosts and Beetlejuice. But you know, that's just kind of the stupid shit that happens in these kind of horror films. But, and then finally, you know, Chucky, Brad Dourif, the voice comes out, "Don't fuck with the Chuck," and then, you know, Beetlejuice can come out and be like, "Hey, I like this guy," and then they kind of join forces, and then maybe, you know, have a fight and whatever, and then it all descends into hell and mayhem and the afterlife. And, you know, I think that would be a fun film. But honestly, if that were, of course it won't happen, but I would much rather just see a straight up Beetlejuice sequel. But, if there was going to be a crossover, I think that's probably the most fun one I can imagine and conjure up with half an hour's notice. So there you go. I hope that was a good answer, man. All right, so there we go. That's the questions. Thanks for those. I will get to Ryan's question shortly. Next, I want to talk to you about what I've been doing lately. I'm not sure if I mentioned it last week or if I skipped the topic, but I'm currently writing a book about my experiences as a backyard wrestler. Sip of Coca-Cola for the trying to find work man thing. Only Steve Austin show listeners will get that really bad reference. So yeah, I'm writing a book on my backyard wrestling days, and I started writing this like 2005, like 9 years ago. It's crazy to think about, but at that point I was traveling around. I went to a few shows around the UK. I was, going out to England and London and Newcastle, and so I was writing about my experiences doing this. And then I actually released it as a kind of a mini book called Double Edged. My life being a backyard wrestler, even though I'd only done it for a few years, really. Seriously. Not even that, really. I mean, I'd always been messing around, not really backyard wrestling, but just kind of play wrestling. And then I got into the backyard wrestling community and so on and so forth. So what's great is I have a lot of detailed writing about those days of like 2005, 2006. Whereas, 2008, 2009 days, I have very little recollection of, and I'm trying to jog my memory. But yeah, I've been trying to write this book for years, and now I'm taking a very serious crack at it because, the ending's there. I've stopped wrestling, and I'm definitely, more than likely not going to have another match. So it's time to kind of really just knuckle down and get it done, because I've said this before, and blogs and vlogs and all that kind of thing, but I'm kind of obsessed with self-preservation in a way. I'm constantly kind of stressed out that I'm not going to get to do the things I want to do before, maybe something bad will happen. That's how my morbid mind works, but I want to get it down, get it done, and so that it's there then, no matter what, and, people can kind of know what my life as a teenager was all about as a backyard wrestler. And so, from 2004 to 2010, that was my life, really. I went to college and I kind of neglected that, but it was really just backyard wrestling, just traveling to London every month, other places, and wrestling in my hometown and stuff like that. And I wanted to just talk about all the stories, all the trips, all the matches, and some of the arguments and some of the drama that went on. It definitely changed my life completely, and so I think it's an interesting story to tell. Now, what I was kind of thinking of was, how am I going to write this? Because when I previously wrote it, and when I've been previously trying to write it, I wasn't sure how to do it. And everything I've written so far, I have maybe like a third of the book just written down, which all of it has to be rewritten because it's not in the style I want to write it. It was written just for the guys, it was just like, it was just a shorthand was used in my writing to put it one way, I guess. Like I would just say, oh yeah, this move, and I did this move, and then someone did this move. And anyone who would read this book outside of backyard wrestling, or even wrestling fans might not get everything that I'm talking about. So I'm trying to write it now with other people in mind, because someone might come across it, and I'm planning on self-publishing it on Amazon eventually, once I get it all sorted out and in order as an ebook. And I'm also contemplating printing up a few copies. There's this great website that you can print your own books at quite a cheap price. And I've done it before. Made a book for my fiance for our anniversary, and it was fantastic, great quality. So I definitely want to use that website and just print off a few copies, just for kind of, again, preservation, I guess. But I'm one chapter in. I've done one chapter so far, working on chapter 2. It's really hard to nail down exactly where I want to go, what I want to say. There's so many things that I could say, and how do you say it, and what do you mention, and how do you structure it and phrase it, and it's tough. And then there's also going to be how am I going to format it when it's in the book form. There's going to be a lot of work, so I'm going to try and crack on with it. And I'm actually going to end this podcast with a reading of chapter 1, and I'm not going to make this a regular thing. I'm not going to read every chapter. It's just the first chapter, and just give you guys a taste of it and just get some of your feedback. I've shown it to some people so far and gotten some good response to it, but I'd be interested in people's opinions. Anyway, moving on. That'll be at the end of the podcast. I promised 2 weeks ago that I'd talk to you about the Indiana Jones films, because I was just about ready to finish off the series. I was going to talk about it, and I forgot. But last week was such a long podcast anyway, so I got the time to talk about it. I finished the series now, the Indiana Jones films, and I love them. I really love them. I wish I'd watched them when I was a kid. I did try to, but Star Wars kind of occupied my time, and just, I almost couldn't conceive of letting another franchise into my life. It was just all Star Wars all the time. It never clicked with me, but now it really did. Me and Connie watched like all 4 films within about a week and a half, something like that. And I loved all of them. I really did love all of them. I saw the 4th one, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in the cinema back in 2008 when it came out. And I quite enjoyed it. I had criticisms about it, but it was what it was. And now I've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I thought was just a fantastic film. 10 out of 10 for me. Just a great adventure that kind of harkens back to like the old adventure films, but also, it's just so well done and so well made by Steven Spielberg. You got the fantastic John Williams score. If you want to read my in-depth reviews of this, written reviews, then go to my Letterboxd page, Letterboxd. That's letterboxd.com/RazorwireRyan. So you can check out all my reviews of the films, quite in depth. But I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was a fantastic adventure film with great imagination and just a really fun ride. Then the sequel, Temple of Doom, a lot weaker. I felt like it was kind of hampered by the fact that it all takes place in India, and it wasn't more of a globe-trotting affair, like it just stayed in the one location, and the Temple of Doom, I guess you could say. That's where like most of the film takes place, and it was great, and it was imaginative and fun and quite dark at times too. Great sets, and I liked the action, the characters and stuff. But the female lead was not a patch on Karen Allen from the first film. Marion, she was fantastic in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the series really misses her, I think, as it goes on, because she was only in the first film. And her chemistry with Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones himself, was brilliant in the first film. But Temple of Doom, it was really good, but not a patch on the first film. And then you have the third one, The Last Crusade, the end of the trilogy, so to speak, where we have Sean Connery playing Henry Jones Sr., the father of Indiana Jones. And again, great chemistry between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford. What a great team up that is. And you get return from Sala, John Rhys Davies from the first film. I felt like he was just there, and his character wasn't really used, unfortunately. He was just there to return, and that was a shame. But Last Crusade, it was more of an adventure going across. They go up in the Zeppelin and riding on a motorbike, and Sean Connery's in the sidecar, and Italy, and all these countries. They go to Jordan, and I'm not sure if actually that's where it was set, but that's where they filmed it. It's Search of the Holy Grail, and that was such a great imaginative story with great characters and some really great action as well. So for me, this is a rare one, but I actually rate Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade equally. I always like to separate films in a series and say, well, I like that one better, but for me, I think, at least on first watch, Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade are just completely even for me. I love them both for different reasons. There's definitely pros and cons to each, and they kind of level each other out, in my opinion, and they're both just fantastic films. And the ending shot of The Last Crusade is just such an amazing one. I love that. It's such a great way to end the film. A fantastic visual, loved it. And a great trilogy. And then you have the fourth film, which came out like 20 years later, and I think it's a great film, great adventure, good fun. All these films are just good fun, and people are like, oh, it's ridiculous that, Indiana Jones was in a lead-lined fridge and survived a nuclear blast. Well, if he didn't break his neck, that's kind of possible, actually. But it's a film, it's an adventure film where, in the first film, people's faces got melted off because of ghostly spirits, Think about it, hello, McFly, think. The Temple of Doom, ridiculous opening where, Harrison Ford and Short Round and the girl jump out of a plane in the mountains with nothing but a rubber fucking dinghy and just slide down the mountain like it's nothing. It's just ridiculous. That to me is more ridiculous than the nuking the fridge moment. I didn't like the CGI bit with Shia LaBeouf swinging through vines like Tarzan in the forest and somehow catching up with trucks. That just was so ridiculous to me. But it wasn't really that bad. I liked it a lot. I was glad that Shia LaBeouf wasn't in it as much as I remember, and his character's not trying to be another Indiana Jones, which I really liked. Speaking of which, I love the opening of The Last Crusade, where we had River Phoenix playing the young Harrison Ford, or playing the young Indiana Jones, in a great little kind of opening set piece. I love that. I thought it was really well done and worked really well into the overall structure of the film. Really, really good opening. But yeah, I mean, I liked how, Shia LaBeouf wasn't kind of being groomed to be the next Indiana Jones. He was just, just a fun character, and, set in the 50s, they could do some different things with it. And, of course, the return of Karen Allen as Marion, which was fantastic. And again, the chemistry was right there with her and Harrison Ford. That was a joy to see. You have a great cast with Ray Winston, John Hurt. Cate Blanchett, was a good villain. Her accent kind of slipped every now and again from the Russian, but... people are like, oh, well, she wasn't a very good villain. Well, look at the other three films. The villains aren't that great. They're pretty stock, played, fairly well. I mean, I guess Paul Freeman was quite, probably the best out of all of them in the first film. But anyway, I love the whole series. I actually prefer Kingdom of the Crystal Skull to Temple of Doom. I just enjoy it because it's more of an adventure. It's more of different locations and, traveling around the world. Whereas Temple of Doom is mainly in one location. But I still really love Temple of Doom as well. It's just on the bottom of the pile for me, but it's really just an embarrassment of riches, really. So there you go, my thoughts on the Indiana Jones films. I want to talk to you briefly about Shia LaBeouf, keeping on topic with that. I've been reading some weird stuff by him lately. He's in this new film with Brad Pitt called Fury. And it's I think it's like a World War II film. And, I'm not sure what the plot is. I know that it's something to do with being stuck in a tank or something, and Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf is in it. And there was a bit where Shia needed to have like a cut on his face, and apparently he wasn't happy with the makeup, and this is a quote from someone who I believe worked with him or was there at the time, and this is a direct quote. He walks out into the hallway and says, "Hey man, want to see something fun? Check this out." And he takes out a knife and cuts his face. Again, this is a quote. For the whole movie, he kept opening these cuts on his face. That's all real. And he also had a tooth, actually removed from his mouth for the film. Now, there's method acting, and then there's going a bit too far. Cutting your own face is just ridiculous. I mean, I shouldn't get into that because I actually have I've cut my head before intentionally in a wrestling match, but that's a bit different, and again, the way I would do it was with a tiny little razor blade, just a little nick, and you have the dribble of blood coming down for the dramatic effect, and it wasn't really that dangerous or anything. It's just like cutting your finger really. But to get a knife out and to start cutting the side of your face, it just seems batshit crazy to me. I mean, he's been going through a lot of weird stuff, but Brad Pitt has been quoted as saying that I got the quote here up on this website talking about working with him on Fury. He said, I love this boy. He's one of the best actors I've ever seen. He's full on commitment, man. He's living it like no one else. Let me tell you, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great actors. He's one of the best I've seen." So, Brad Pitt, very respected, great actor. And he's, going to bat for Shia LaBeouf. It just sounds to me like Shia LaBeouf it tries too hard sometimes to go method. And, when he was in Lawless... I forget her name, Mia Wasikowska, I don't know how you pronounce that, but she was on the film and she was almost ready to walk out in the movie apparently, and she was saying he's a very method actor, and so she was on the receiving end of the method. And if you make your fellow actor uncomfortable doing stuff like that, I don't know what it was, I think that you're going too far. There should be a way to find the truth in something without completely burying yourself in it and mutilating your body and stuff like that. I don't know. For me, he seems to be just trying too hard. And then, of course, he had his very well-publicized thing where he made this short film, and it was called HowardCantor.com. And he was showing around the festival circuit, and it was getting great reviews. But then someone realized that he'd actually copied this from someone who had... I think it was a comic book. I've got the article up here. Yeah, it was an article, not an article, it was, let me get there, it was a comic, and the comic and film opened with the exact same, very specific monologue, so he kind of plagiarized this comic book, and, the film, is called A Film by Shia LaBeouf, and there's no credit to the guy who wrote the original comic. So yeah, the comic in question was a 2007 comic called Justin M. Damiano by Daniel Close, and Close said the first he ever heard of the film by Shia was this morning, and this was again at the time of it all kicking off. The first I ever heard of the film was this morning when someone sent me a link. I'd never spoken to or met Mr. LaBeouf. I've never even seen one of his films that I can recall, and I was shocked to say the least when I saw that he took the script and even many of the visuals from a very personal story I did 6 or 7 years ago and passed it off as his own work. I actually can't imagine what was going through his mind. And so, Shia LaBeouf's cover was rumbled, and so he had to kind of issue an apology, and his tweets were: copying isn't particularly creative work. Being inspired by someone else's idea to produce something new and different is creative work. In my excitement and naivety as an amateur filmmaker, I got lost in the creative process and neglected to follow proper accreditation. I'm embarrassed that I failed to credit Daniel Close for his original graphic novella, Justin M. Damiano, which served as my inspiration. I was truly moved by his piece of work, and I knew that it would make a poignant and relevant short. I apologize to all who assumed I wrote it. I deeply regret the manner in which these events have unfolded and want Daniel Close to know that I have a great respect for his work. Well, it's all well and good apologizing and deeply regretting the matter after you've been caught. Apparently he'd been showing this film for like a year or something. I don't know the full details, but it just he just seems to be trying too hard and making the wrong decisions. But I've got nothing against him because I don't know the full story about any of these things, but it just seems to me at the moment that he's a very interesting character, and I don't know, just cutting your own face up, man, it just seems like, what the hell's wrong with someone who does that, I mean, there's good methods, but then, well, I've already said it, there's going too far, in my opinion. I'll wrap that up, and just let me know if you've got any thoughts about Shia LaBeouf. Now, this week, or I think it was last week, actually, the first song for the new Pink Floyd album was released on the radio online, and then a full version leaked online has been spreading around, and I couldn't resist. I had to listen to it, and I'm going to buy the album anyway, but it was the only song on the album apparently that has lyrics, so it was kind of a bittersweet affair. I had mixed feelings about it, and when I first listened to it, I wasn't a fan. I wasn't a fan of how the lyrics sounded. They were kind of overpowered by kind of female backing vocals. David Gilmour, of course, the lead vocalist for Pink Floyd, sings the song louder than words. But after I listened to it more and more, I really liked it, especially the full version with the longer verse, the longer intro and outro, and the guitar solo. It's a great song, I think, honestly. I love it, and I've listened to it many, many times. It was hard to take it off repeat, actually. It's a new Pink Floyd song, for God's sake. I mean, when are you ever going to be around for a new Pink Floyd song? I got into the, very late into the game of being a Pink Floyd fan in 2007. 40 years after the band had released their first album, I became a fan. And that was, again, like 15 years after their... Not 15, but, almost 15 years after their last album, which was The Division Bell. And that was always... Well, not always, but up to a point it was pretty clear that was the last Pink Floyd album. And the last song on that album, High Hopes, is one of my favourite songs of all time. It's very special to me for numerous reasons, which I won't go into, but I love the song. And I think it's a perfect ending to a band's career. So, again, mixed feelings, because Louder Than Words is no High Hopes. It's nowhere near as good a song as that, but it's a very nice song, and the lyrics kind of describe the history of the band, and I really like it. It's weird hearing the word diss in a Pink Floyd song. The opening lyrics are, we bitch and we fight, diss each other on sight, and it just feels weird to hear David Gilmour singing, diss each other on sight. It's like, it doesn't really sit on the ear very well, But, the song itself, I really did. Again, I'm listening to it a lot, and I'm really excited for next month. And the release of The Endless River, the final Pink Floyd album, and the swan song for Richard Wright. I love that they're using Richard Wright's keyboard recordings to have him be a part of a Pink Floyd album posthumously. I think that's fantastic. So yeah, very happy Pink Floyd fan here today, or this week I should say. Sip of Coke before we continue. Not much more, but for the rest of the month in terms of horror films, I'm going to post part 2 of Horror Month video on my channel this week, which will be me talking about the horror films I've watched since the last Horror Month video, which was part 1 about a week ago. So I'm not going to go into any of those films now because I've already made a video about them. But for the rest of the month, I'm going back to Wales, visiting home for a week. Hope to watch some horror films there with my mum and Connie, my fiance, and get some more horror films under my belt. And then when we come back, I'm going to try and watch a load more. And as I say in the video, I might be posting an unreleased video, which is me and Connie doing Ryan Chatway's Fright Fest. We watched 4 horror films in one night back in October of last year and just never made the video, so that might be released at the end of the month, maybe on Halloween night. See what happens. There was something else I wanted to talk about very briefly. Just more movie news. It's been announced that Léa Seydoux will be the new Bond girl in the next James Bond film, which will be directed again by Sam Mendes, who did Skyfall. Very excited for that. I loved Skyfall. Great Bond movie. One of my favourites for sure. And Léa Seydoux was just such a perfect fit for a Bond girl. The Bond girls have always been, very European and, just all sorts of nationalities from across the world, Russia and all this, but I think she's a perfect fit. She's got a great look. She's, can be very attractive at times, and so that's perfect for a Bond girl, but she's also a great actress as well, so I think she'll fit in perfectly with the world of James Bond. And also there's been rumours that Dave Bautista, Drax the Destroyer from Guardians of the Galaxy, and of course the WWE, former WWE star, apparently is being groomed for the villain or one of the henchmen roles in the film. That'd be quite good. I think his acting is limited. I think James Gunn really worked well with him in Guardians of the Galaxy and got the best out of Dave Bautista. And again, credit to him for kind of trying to take acting lessons as well before he did Guardians of the Galaxy, even though he's been in movies before. I appreciate that Bautista's really taking it seriously, so hopefully it'll be good. If he's in it, that is, of course. There's nothing confirmed yet. But yeah, I'm excited for the next James Bond film. I'm a big fan of the franchise. So best cinema experience. This is an interesting one. For me, I always go back to when someone says best cinema experience. I don't know if it's the best, but the one that always pops into my head is back in 2004, Shaun of the Dead. Wow, I mean, just the anticipation and then the payoff for seeing that film in the cinema is just one of my best film experiences ever. Again, I actually mentioned last week I'm a big fan of the TV show Spaced. And Shaun the Dead was basically like Space the movie, but with like a big genre in it. You had Edgar Wright, directing. You had Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as the main stars. You had Peter Serafinowicz, who was in Space. He's another character in the film. We had cameos from people who are in space, like Jessica Stevenson and Julia Deakin. Even Michael Smiley had a very brief cameo as Tyres, who's one of my favorite characters from Space, and he was one of the zombies. You just blink and you'll miss him, but he's there, and I love that. So me and my friends, in high school, we were leaving high school that year, 2004. I'm not sure if we'd left at this point, but it was around that time leaving high school, and I got my friend into Spaced. And we were like, okay, let's go watch Shaun the Dead, and we're really excited for it. It just looked so great from the trailers and everything. And I was in like a chat room like the week before it came out, and it was Edgar Wright was in there, and he was answering questions from people, and people were like, oh, what age rating did Shaun the Dead get? Over in the UK, we have rated U, which is universal, anyone can watch it. PG, go in with a parent. 12, you have to be 12. 15 and 18. And people were wondering if it was going to be a 15 or an 18, which, back then there's kind of a big difference if you're a teenager. If you're 15, 16, you can't get into an 18 film. It's a bit frustrating. And again, we were 16 at the time, in the summer of 2004, I think it was, or maybe before the summer. I'm not sure exactly when it came out, to be honest, but either way, 15, 16. And he said, oh yeah, it's 15. So great, we can go see it in the cinema. So we went to our local cinema in Cardiff, which was UGC at the time. I think it's now Cineworld. We went in, we were there excitedly to get our tickets, and the woman was like, ID please? And we were like, excuse me? And she's like, I need to see your identification that you're over 18 years old. And I was like, no, we're going to see Shaun the Dead. And she's like, yes, I need identification to show me that you're over 18 years old. And I'm like, the film's rated 15. She's like, no, it's rated 18. And I was like, no, it's rated 15. And she gave me this look, and I was like, I don't want to be a nerd, but I was in the back of my head, I'm thinking this, and I was like, I was in a chat room with the director like a week ago. He said it was a 15, the director of the film. And I looked on the screen, there it was, Shaun the Dead 18. Oh, gutted. So we left, and we're just like, oh my god, day ruined, And then we walked over to the other cinema in Cardiff, which was basically in, or just on the side of, I don't know, it's not in, but it's right next to the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff. I can't remember what cinema it was at the time. That's changed names over the years, but we went in there, and there was Shaun the Dead 15. So we went in, and we were like, "What was that weird?" And this was a more expensive cinema as well, so it was a real kick in the nuts. But we went in, and the cinema was half full. Maybe like 150 people in there, maybe just 100 actually. Thinking about it, yeah, it was a fairly sizable room. It was quite big, not huge, but decent. And again, about half full. So I'd say about 100 people in there. And I'm telling you, every one of those people in there, it seemed to me, were just like the three or four of us. I can't remember. It was me, at least two of my friends, and one of them came as well. I can't remember, but I definitely remember the two who did come. And I was like, they're just like us. They are fans of space because every little, there was a couple of space, not references, but just kind of, again, the cameos and stuff, and everyone was reacting to it. And I just knew that there was space fans there, and everyone got the humor. It all clicked. Every joke hit. It just, all across the board, it was such a fun movie to watch. Everyone was laughing. We had such a fun time, and it was just amazing. I left that cinema thinking that was just such an amazing film. It's just so funny, so on point. Great visual gags, great writing, great comedic performances, great filmmaking. The direction was great. It was just such a fun, well-made film. That had the gore to fit a zombie movie, but it had the slight romantic element. That was being touted by the makers at the time as a rom-com, a romantic zombie comedy. But the humor was fantastic, but also the horror aspect was done quite well. I wouldn't say it was scary at any point, but quite creepy and gory, very gory at times. And there's a really tense scene at the end, which for me was just so like, wow, that was a powerful moment near the end in the Winchester bar. And then again, it just goes into like absolute hilarity again, and it took you up and down, and was just one of my favorite films for sure. It's in my top 50, I'm pretty sure. And that cinema experience was just amazing. And there's quite a lot of them, and I could actually make this a weekly thing. I think I might actually, or at least come back to it next week, because I want to get moving on to finish out this podcast. I don't want it to be too long this week. So that was, I might say that is still my best cinema experience thinking about it, but there's many more. And so again, I could string this out. So next week I'll talk about another one of my best cinema experiences. And this is how it goes in the Razor Review Podcast. I just make it up on the fly as I go along. So finally, to end this podcast, I'm going to give you a reading, an exclusive reading from the first chapter of my book. And when I start reading, you'll know what the title of the book is. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. And again, this first chapter is, I guess it is about wrestling, but it's not too wrestling heavy. It's I'll let you judge that. And again, it won't be an ongoing thing. Just for now, I'll be reading the first chapter just to get people interested in it. And hopefully, when I do release it, some of you guys, my subscribers and listeners, will actually be interested in checking it out. So here we go. Let's head straight into the reading and end this podcast. Alright, before I go into this reading, just so you know that this is not the final chapter. I might change it. I might extend it a little. I'm not sure where I'm gonna if I'm gonna add more and not just cut it off where I do. So we'll just see how this goes. And again, this isn't final, and there's probably a few edits to be made as well. But we'll just go for it and just I thought it'd be fun to do. So let's head right into it. Back to the Yard: A Tale of Blood, Sweat, and Elbow Drops by Luke Ryan. Chapter 1. 1st of January 2006. The Billy Banks, Penarth. I was lying in the grass in the cold, wet mud. My bare chest was being soothed by the piercing breeze after the chops I'd just received. Steve was carefully placing the NAW Heavyweight Championship belt back in its case, blood seeping from his nose. I eventually got up. Only a few people were there. Gruff, Rich, Rowley and Dave were joking around, barely paying attention to my motionless state. I realized I couldn't sit there forever, dwelling on the fact that my big match with backyard wrestling legend Steve Frowell could have gone a lot better. So I got to my feet, my black t-shirt draped around me in tatters, and the disappointment in how the match went soon became irrelevant as I realized, regardless of how this particular outing had gone, that it might be worth giving this wrestling thing a proper shot. 10 years earlier. You know those memories you have where something important happened in your life, but you only recall the moment of emotion, not the whole picture? I was waiting for everyone to filter out my dad's dojo in Penarth, my hometown, after a ninjutsu lesson. He taught a bunch of kids of varying ages, including myself, in a small upstairs floor of an old church. I was hanging back outside of a tiny room that I suppose you would call an office. It had a desk, so I'm calling it an office. I was very nervous because I was about to go and tell my dad that I was moving away. I can remember the look on his face and my gut feeling of apprehension and sadness. I have no idea what I said, what he said, or anything before or after that moment. It's funny how our minds collect these fragmented memories, and I sometimes wonder how accurate they are even too. I have such a strong and vivid recollection of punching a classmate in the side of the head after school one day. He'd been bugging me all afternoon and bullying me in a passive-aggressive kind of way, and I just snapped. Thrown completely off guard, he looked at me in shock and pain as I firmly said, "That's a warning." I'm pretty sure it never happened though. There was no repercussion to that incident from him, the school, or anyone who saw it happen. It therefore can only have been my utmost desire to do just that, clock him in the head and give him my best tough guy one-liner that was somehow merged into my memory. Is my brain trying to convince me that it happened, and I've caught it in the act? And that, dear reader, is exactly the kind of keenly observed psychological musing you could not expect from this book. I know my dad didn't react in the really, really bad way I must have been anticipating in that office all those years ago. I have fractured feelings deep inside my brain that tell me that he was very comforting and reassuring to me about it. My mum had remarried, and my new stepdad, who I loved at the time, was in the army. So we were to move with him to Larkhill, a military garrison town in Wiltshire, England. It was a surreal experience at 8 years old to up and move to a whole new house, let alone a new country, when all I'd ever been cognizant of was one home. I'd lived in a few places as a baby, but all I knew was the comforting familiarity of Chichester Road and the infamous area known as the Billy Banks in Penarth, a location that will become a character of its own in this story. Growing up in that house with my mum, I had a string of obsessions, from Thomas the Tank Engine to Sonic the Hedgehog and the seminal moment of falling in love with Star Wars. Yet I never saw a single second of what would become the biggest obsession of the next 15 years of my life: wrestling. I was barely aware of it. When we relocated our lives from the sunny shores of South Wales to the endless fields of Salisbury Plain in central southern England, I discovered professional wrestling. It would go on to have a huge impact on my teenage life, and would mould me into the person I am today. Larkhill was also new and exciting. There was a small wood just outside my house that I was able to play in until it was dark, as I could always see the light of our kitchen window and feel safe. I quickly found a best friend in Chris Marshall, as I walked around my class on my first day of school asking everyone where they lived, an uncharacteristically outgoing move for me at the time. Chris replied to my question with the same street I lived on, and this seemed to be a perfect reason to become the bestest of buds. Living in the country was so different than the more urban landscape of Penarth, and I had some of the best times of my childhood there, just playing outside all day without a care in the world. One summer, the wood next to where I lived became a dumping ground for logs for some reason, and so we all started taking them from their piles to build forts amongst the trees. Some of the local kids were really great at putting them together, almost directing the construction like foremen at times. It was like some weird Lord of the Flies community between 3 and 8 p.m. every day after school. It was during one of those warm summer nights, sitting inside one of the forts, an elaborately designed one with an entrance on the roof, that some of the kids started talking animatedly about wrestling. I didn't know them very well though, so I didn't attempt to join in on the conversation, but listened and made a mental note to check out what the fuss was all about. After perusing the channels on our cable box one morning, I found the World Wrestling Federation. This is where I can try and make out like it was a Jake Blues seeing the light kind of moment, but it wasn't quite that formative. It caught my attention, there was something captivating about it, but I wasn't hooked just yet. Over the next year or so, I would catch a Saturday morning airing of a show here and there, becoming more and more enamored with the larger-than-life characters. I will always point to Mick Foley as being my first real favourite wrestler, with Shawn Michaels taking the all-time top spot. However, the man who really reeled me in into that crazy world of bright lights and hard-hitting action was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Arguably the most popular and successful professional wrestler of all time, the Texas Rattlesnake had an infectious, take-no-names, kick-ass attitude that informed a generation. Whether he was spewing mild obscenities to his opponents, downing beers after a victory, or dropping his boss, the one and only Vince McMahon, with a stone-cold stunner, he was endlessly entertaining. He also provided me with the knowledge to realize my closer friends were also fans of wrestling. The most popular sport in the UK is, has, and always will be football. I was never taken with it growing up, but it was a necessity to play it out in the field between our streets, as most children's outdoor lives revolved around footy. One cold December day in 1997, I was playing football with the Guy brothers, Ben and Jamie, the Smiles brothers, Martin and Jono, along with Dean Jones and my best mate, Chris Marshall. Using jackets as goalposts, one particular score had seen the ball cross dubiously across one of the markers, and neither team could decide whether it counted or not. Being boisterous young boys who hadn't even reached double digits yet, cooler heads did not prevail. Ben grabbed Martin and I panicked before quickly realizing it was only playful. Then suddenly Dean had hooked Ben's head over his right shoulder with his arm and jumped to the ground. "Stunner! Stunner!" someone shouted in reference to Steve Austin's finishing move. I laughed and felt a surge of excitement and amusement. The idea that my circle of friends might watch the bizarre yet alluring blend of sports and entertainment had never really occurred to me before that day. I quickly began asking them everything and anything about their interest in wrestling, how long they'd been watching it, who was their favourite, and did they have any tapes. Most of them had the same response: they had only recently gotten into watching Monday Night Raw recently, and everyone loved Stone Cold. It gave us more to bond over, and in the coming months we would play wrestling in the fields, borrow VHS tapes off each other, and generally just indulge in being wrestling fanatics. Even though it had become the start of a new obsession for me, I still didn't catch up with every WWF show and didn't know a lot about the storylines on a regular basis. The internet was still in its infancy at this point, and I assumed that a wrestling magazine would only exist if I made one myself. Ben started to get the official home video releases of the pay-per-view events, which was so exciting. It was one thing to have recordable tapes of Raw episodes, but to have a full pay-per-view in an official release with awesome artwork on the cover seemed like the best thing since the Super Nintendo at the time. Sometime in the summer of 1998, Dean suggested we start having proper wrestling shows. We already play wrestled around all the time, why not have our own characters and shows? So we decided to try and find a place to do it where we wouldn't be disturbed by parents, settling on a spot inside one of the many woods in Lark Hill, near Ben and Jamie's house. We cleared a square patch of dirt inside from leaves, and even swept up a rectangular spot outside of the ring to mark where the imaginary commentator's table would be. I think Dean even set up some flimsy string across 4 poles to simulate turnbuckles and ropes. I really wish I brought my camera along to some of those little events we did. Having those memories on video would be amazing. It was all very exciting to a 9-year-old, and we all thought our first show was brilliant, of course. We weren't concerned with being good or even correct and safe. It was all about the fun factor. There wasn't much danger though, as we didn't even really slam each other. It was all holds and just pissing about. Though once I wrestled with some younger boys outside my house and did a tombstone pile driver on one of them, a very dangerous move. My mum had seen me do it and told me to be more careful, especially with smaller boys. The way she calmly told me to be more responsible resonated so much more than if she had shouted at me, one of the many reasons I wouldn't have wanted to be brought up by anyone else. Over the next couple of years, wrestling took something of a backseat to other things. That Christmas, a little game called The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time, found its way under some of our trees. Not mine. We would spend days exploring the game, the fishing minigame in particular, and along with other classics such as Super Mario 64, playing on our Nintendo 64 consoles became the #1 pastime in the neighborhood. It wasn't until the following year when we all caught the WWF bug again around the time of WrestleMania 2000. By this time I had entered the big bad world of high school, which is always hyped up as a terrifying experience, but of course was just another step up the educational ladder. The sad thing was a few of those friends didn't even go to the same comprehensive school as me. We still played together in the afternoons and evenings though, excitedly discussing the latest goings on in the World Wrestling Federation. Stone Cold had left to have neck surgery in late 1999, leaving the inimitable superstar known as The Rock to become the new phenomenon. Every week he'd say something so funny that by the time we met up we had all memorized his freshest saying, from shut your mouth and know your role to take your, insert any object here for added comedic effect, turn it sideways and stick it straight up your candy ass, and beyond. We started to wrestle again, but entering our teenage years it wasn't quite as carefree or innocent as it once was. The built-in alpha male instinct started to take over for some of the guys, and instead of doing what professional wrestlers do, cooperating with each other to work a wrestling match, they would make it real. Which for the purposes of this book is what is known as going shoot, by eliminating the element of theatricality that enables wrestling to be so exciting. At the time you could compare wrestling to boxing, and these days mixed martial arts is an even bigger example. Sure, there is an edge and thrill to seeing real competition that you don't get with pro wrestling. Yet, an MMA fight can last 10 seconds and end with a knockout. A wrestling match always strives to put on a show for the audience, a back and forth encounter with twists and turns designed to entertain. Real fighting is a competitive sport, and pro wrestling is a competitive art form. Bringing a shoot aspect into our matches took the play right out of play wrestling and turned it into something I was growing quite uncomfortable with. It all came to a head one summer evening as we wrestled on a spot of grass behind Chris's house. He was wrestling Martin, who would put him in a figure 4 leg lock, a fairly complicated maneuver, twisting your opponent's legs over his other. When it's hooked in correctly, it looks very painful, and the person held in it can scream in pain, making it appear agonizing. On the other side of the coin, if you apply extra pressure for real, it can actually be as agonizing as it looks, which Martin decided to do, to show off his dominance. It seemed to some of the guys that the more real, the better. But even then, I knew that wasn't what wrestling was all about. I could tell Chris was really struggling with the pain, and Martin didn't let him go until he saw silent tears rolling down Chris's face. I had only seen my best friend cry twice, including that moment. He was younger than me, but I always looked up to him as a towering example of toughness. Me, I cried every week, forget about it. Besides being a wimp, I also struggled with confrontational situations. Even something as minor as being singled out by a teacher in class, my eyes would always well up out of frustration. I hated it. Chris, though, he never cried, and when he begrudgingly let a few tears drop that night, he wasn't met with compassion or remorse, but with laughter at his expense. Everyone seemed to find it really funny except for me and, of course, Chris. He stood up and shook it off, immediately feigning that he wasn't bothered or hurt. It really upset me, and I had no backbone to do or say anything about it either. I thought that it would be the end of it, but I saw something brewing behind Chris's eyes, and he suddenly went for Martin. The fight lasted a few seconds as everyone jumped in to stop it, so Chris just gave up and went home. To see him so angry and embarrassed was horrible. We were all growing up and growing apart, and this incident just served to speed up that process. That uneasy moment marked the end of our closeness. We all continued to hang out with less and less frequency, but things were never really the same. It was a shame it went down like that, but within a year we'd all moved away from Lark Hill. The earlier years with those guys are some of my most cherished memories, but they're always ever so slightly tainted by that one ugly summer night. To paraphrase Stone Cold Steve Austin himself, boys will be boys, and boys are dumb. So there you go, that was chapter 1, Back to the Yard, A Tale of Blood, Sweat and Elbow Drops, which is a play on Mick Foley's autobiography, A Tale of Blood, Sweat and... or what was it? Blood, Sweat and... no, Blood, Tears and Sweat Socks, something like that, yeah. Or Blood, Sweat, Socks and Tears, I don't know. But yeah, it is what it is. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoyed. Again, I won't be doing this every week, but it's just kind of a little sneak peek, and I'll probably, again, edit this and change some things around, but actually reading it out loud really gave me a good feel of how it reads and how it flows, and some things I should change, so that's been good, at least for myself. So there we go, that's been the podcast this week. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for next week. Hopefully I'll get one out, even though I'm going to be away. But again, I'll be... this is a home away from home. I'm going home, so I should be able to sort something out and get another podcast up. I'll be bringing my microphone. So, yeah. Again, as always, let me know if you downloaded this. Let me know your thoughts and feedback through Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, however you feel necessary. Always want to hear feedback from you guys and more questions to answer next week and the weeks beyond that. So, thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch your ass down the road.